I will be refuting the claim that GMO crops are superior to non-GMO crops. And the points I'm going to be making are about how there is no scientific consensus on the information for either direction, so you cannot make a sweeping claim as to one being superior. I will also be talking about the lack of transparency in the GMO industry and those who regulate the GMO industry. And then for my third point, I'm going to be talking about how there is no GMO crop that is verified and commercialized that is superior nutritionally to its non-GMO counterpart. Okay. So for my first point, there is no scientific consensus as to whether GMO foods are harmful or not to human consumption, and thus there can be no sweeping claims made about which one is superior. A comprehensive review of GMOs found roughly an equal number of research groups, both on each side. Just as many people in favor as against GMO crops and their validity in everyday diets, which means that both sides, there's an equal number of people for and against, so you cannot really say that there's overwhelming evidence for either side, each with their own amount of legitimate evidence as to support their side. There's also a lot of controversy ever since the very beginning of the GMO industry being a thing back in the early 1990s, like mid-1990s, when the FDA approved of GMO products to be commercialized. That decision was heavily criticized for being corrupt and widely lobbied by GMO corporations, and is criticized for not being very responsible in the fact-checking and scientific research put into it. And a quote from Dr. Lefan, a microbiologist who worked on early GMO products back in those early 90s. He said that he now believes, as a much more experienced scientist, that GMO crops still run far ahead of our understanding of their risks. So to put that bluntly, he does not believe that we, as of now, this quote came from 2015, he does not believe that as of now we understand the effects of GMOs on ourselves and our diets and on the animals that we feed GMOs to say that they are safe or unsafe for consumption. For my second point, the lack of transparency in the GMO industry and those who regulate them creates an untrustworthy environment, and a lot of shady things go on behind that veil, which makes it impossible to verify whether or not these claims are true that GMOs are superior or, for that matter, inferior to non-GMO counterparts. The safety studies, for instance, that the GMO companies produce in order to get their food passed are only released after the GMO products that they make are verified at that point, which means that independent scientists aren't given the time to verify those claims and those studies. Secondly, the GMO industry's safety information on the effects of pesticides and herbicides used on their products are kept completely secret for the most part in the entire industry, which makes it impossible for independent scientists and independent groups to verify the claims made. For instance, the person I'm refuting brought up the fact that GMO products have less harm from pesticides and herbicides because they require less. However, there are contradictory studies that also say that in certain cases, GMO products can even absorb more herbicides and pesticides into the skin of the produce, making them potentially more dangerous, and those claims cannot be verified. For my third point, I'd like to say that there are no GMO crops that are more nutritious than its non-GMO counterpart that are verified and commercialized. By that I mean that there are no GMO products, such as the point brought up about golden rice, that we are allowed to buy in traditional markets because scientifically they are unverified, and there is not enough evidence towards those to actually make them open for regulation and technically fit for human consumption in traditional markets. Like I was saying, the person I'm refuting brought up golden rice, but golden rice for the most part was an overhyped exaggeration of unfinished science at the time, and even now it is still an incomplete science and incomplete product that, while it could hypothetically, with more years of research and more years of, as it's called, cross-straining with traditional strains of rice, it could potentially result in the results that it was hyped up for. However, as of now, it is basically just overhyped science that is incomplete and is not fit for human consumption for the most part. and even in some independent studies apart from that, have been proven not to provide the extra vitamins that they're supposed to. And even in some cases, independent researchers have found that some GMO products even on average have less nutritional value than their non-GMO counterparts, which makes it impossible, or which makes it very difficult to make the claim that GMOs would, as of now with the current study, with the current science, say that they are more beneficial to our health than than traditional foods. That's it.
Right, Sean, well, you've developed your own structure for the responses. Sometimes it's being applied to the advocate's argument, but often there's not really a direct relationship between the things that you're saying and the advocate's argument. I heard one source citation in the presentation, and that was it, and that was a generic piece of information that says the information, what we know is about GMOs, basically it's running ahead of what we're capable of understanding. That's an okay quote. It suggests that there's some potential risk there, but that's as far as it went. Everything on the second and the third point is all asserted. Some studies say, independent studies report. I don't hear any independent studies being presented. I didn't hear a quote from some study. I just heard you assert those kinds of things, and you need to have some data to back this up. Otherwise, it's simply an assertion on your part. I do think that you, on the first point, the very reason that we have an argument is that there's no consensus on safety. That's why the advocate is making an argument on this particular point, advocating for the position that they're taking. You don't offer any evidence except for general criticism of the FDA, which again is not particularly well cited. It's just like, well, back 20 years ago, they were widely criticized for doing this. Well, my memory is that the people that widely criticized them weren't particularly credible in the first place, so why is it we're worried about them now? Or maybe they were criticized and there was no reason for that criticism. We don't really get a discussion of what the actual evidence is here. You mentioned a whole bunch of things that are preconceptions about the GMOs, that they don't share their data until after the stuff is approved, or there's secrecy about the pesticides and herbicides. I don't know why you believe those things to be true. I don't have any source that indicates that that's true. You treat it as if it's a fact on the one point, and I'm going, okay, well, how do you know this? Because I've never heard this sort of thing. I'm not saying it's untrue. I'm saying it's unproven in this particular circumstance. And then the same thing with golden rice. You basically make a claim that says it's largely unverified, it's not available anyplace, and it's overhyped. I'm going, well, those are good declarative sentences. Now, where's the grounds that supports those positions? That's the thing that's missing in a lot of this argument. So you've organized your position clearly. You've stated your claims. What you haven't done is offered grounds and warrant for those particular points the way that we need to have it to be convinced that you've got the right position on this. All right, thank you.